Hi, welcome back. This is Gayatri. Today we'll be looking at Sutra 4. We are studying Patanjali's Yoga Sutras through 6 bhashyas. But first, a little prayer. Sahana vavatu, sahano bhunaktu, sahaviryam karvavahai, tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Sutra 4. Vritti Sarupya Ittaratra. What does this mean? In Maharshi Vedavyasa's commentary, as interpreted by Professor Ganganath Jha, the 4th sutra is translated as there is conformity to the functions in the other state. So now we have attained, inhibition, the supreme consciousness, Kaivalya. So now everything else is packed off as the other state. This sutra is a response to the unarticulated question. If the spirit is abiding as witness in isolation, when the chitta vrittis are inhibited, then what is the status of the spirit in the active waking state? In Sutra 3, we answered the question, what is the status of the spirit once the consciousness has been attained? Today we're asking, what is the status of the spirit in the active waking state? What Maharshi Vedavyasa basically categorizes as the other state. In the waking state, the spirit is identified with the functions of the mind. There is only one perception, and cognition is perception. Over here, I just wanted to insert an aside. So I was speaking to one of the gurus, one of the practitioners of Tantra, a very enlightened person, who had memory of his past life and past death, more importantly. And what is very interesting is he was explaining the process of death. And he said, the moment you begin to die, what goes is gravity. When gravity goes, what happens? Today your consciousness knows that it must hear through the ear, it must smell through the nose, it must taste through the mouth, it must see through the eyes, and it must feel through the skin. Once gravity goes, consciousness is one mass with multiple functions. So you're hearing with everything, you're seeing with everything, you're tasting throughout your body. That is kind of what Maharshi Vedavyasa here is indicating, that when this identification with the sense objects, with the body, is supreme, there is only one perception, and cognition is perception. When it disintegrates, it is greatly differentiated. The mind, he says, is held like a magnet by the spirit, and through its power of perception becomes swa, or the property of the spirit. In this seamless relationship, the mind functions become apparent. What does he mean by the mind functions become apparent? It is this, that the hearing goes through the ear, the seeing goes through the eye, the smelling goes through the nose, and the mind functions are correctly attributed by which they may identify with the sense object. Swami Satyananda explains this sutra as a play on 4 words. Vritti, which is modification. Sarupyam, which is indication of form or identification of form. And Ittaratra, or the other state. So he translates it as, or there is identification with the modifications of chitta. So when not abiding in its essential nature, what happens to Purusha, or the self, or the soul? Then patterns are superimposed on the soul. Wrong identification. Like when we experience the emotions, you're watching a movie and you're identifying with the emotions, you start crying, you start laughing, you react. Though we are only witnessing consciousness. At that point, you are no longer witnessing consciousness, you are identifying consciousness. We identify with chitta and its modifications. Just a clarification here, what is vritti? How is vritti a modification? A modification is that which interrupts and causes the chitta to react. It's a provocation. Swami Vivekananda explains it as, at other times, the seer is identified with the modifications. If I am in a state of sorrow, someone blames me, this becomes a modification, vritti, and I identify with it. The result is misery. So whenever there is identification with the sense object, and through that identification with the sense object, a modification applies to us. You blame me, you scold me, I identify with it. It is a generator of misery. B.K. Sangar translates it as, at other times, the seer identifies with the fluctuating consciousness. When the seer identifies with the sense objects or the consciousness of perception, he forgets his splendorous original state, the state he has already introduced to us in Sutra 3. If you've forgotten that state, you need to go back and look at it. The nature of consciousness is to perceive a sense object, identify with it, and draw the seer towards it. So I am seer, this is sense object, this cup. The nature of consciousness is to perceive the cup, identify with it, my cup, and draw me towards it. I must have this cup, nobody else must drink from this cup. Thus, the seer becomes engrossed in the object. Intelligence diversifies from here. The soul doesn't dwell in its own glory, thinking has manifested instead of the soul. So, the way the yoga gurus speak about intelligence and its diversification, you see, in the mundane world, this is what we reward. This is what we are proud of. Okay, we say, oh, my intelligence is extremely diverse. I'm capable of identifying with so many sense objects. And over here, the gurus are literally face palming and banging their head on their hands, because that is how you multiply your identification with the sense objects. Oh, I am a knower of philosophy, but I am also a knower of the oceans. I am also a knower of finance. That means all that means is you are enmeshed and admired in everything that you claim to know. And you are getting more and more stuck in samsara. The soul doesn't dwell in its own glory. Thinking has manifested instead of the soul. The more thoughts you have, the more cognition you have, the more identification you have, the less the purely established soul is free to be. And you are less free to be in that state. The imprint of the objects get imprinted on the chitta, which projects onto sense objects in order to identify with them. Its nature becomes volatile as it changes to identify with the sense objects perceived. Imagine chitta as an optical lens with no light of its own. It is directly above the soul, which has its own light. Consumed by sense objects we identify with, we are only aware on a day-to-day basis with the upper side of the lens. In contact with the world, it becomes opaque, dirty, and forgets the inner source of self-radiance. It is kind of like the metaphor of Plato's cave, right? You're sitting behind the flames, you see the shadows dancing on the walls, and you assume that there are, people there, not realizing that's a projection of your own mind. And a all the sense objects exist as projections of the mind. And if you want to look at it metaphorically, then in terms of my fame, my name, what I'm earning, what is my designation, who am I? Very few people. You will ask them, hi, tell me about yourself. All they will talk about is what they have. A designation that has been given to them, an earning, a degree, an institution, a college, right? An organization that they work for. And you can ask again and you say, okay, but tell me about yourself. And they will tell you maybe hobbies or things that they can quantify by degrees and qualifications and awards and money. Who are you? Nobody knows. Consumed by sense objects we identify with, we are only aware on a day-to-day basis with the upper side of the lens, P.K.S. Iyengar says. Osho translates this as in the other states there is identification with the modifications of the mind. When you are not established in witnessing, in all other states you identify with the mind. You identify with the flow of thoughts, emotions, sensory perceptions, sense objects. And over here he gives a lovely example. He says even the Buddha or Patanjali feel hunger. But they would never say, I am hungry. They would say, the body feels hunger. Patanjali would remain an observer. Once you identify, you cease to be a witness and become one with the thought. So that's also part of the process of, say, a meditation process like Vipassana, where you're not eating after 11 o'clock and then your next meal is the next morning. And you're sitting there and you're saying, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. And if you're meditating, and if the meditation is, progressing correctly, in due course you manage to look at it and say, as long as you have your calorific intake and you're not collapsing and your health is not in danger, you are in a position to look at your body and say, you know what, this body is feeling hunger and I am witnessing it. Yoga is a cessation of mind. When mind ceases, you are established in witnessing self. If you are in identification, you are in the world. You are in misery and have not transcended samsara. Barbara Stoller Miller uses it as a sort of the fourth sutra as a bridge to the next five. And she says, otherwise, the observer identifies with the turnings of thought. That is how she translates it. So Barbara Stoller Miller uses the fourth aphorism to lead into Sutra 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11, which explain the turnings of thoughts. Since the observer in Sutra 3 is established in witnessing, it is the natural counter that if it is not, it is established in identifying with Chitta Vritti, that is thought, emotion, perception, and that which is perceived. Next, we will move to Sutra 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, which I will try to bundle for you because these describe the turnings of thoughts. Thank you for listening.